This is 150 years is an amazing amount of time for things in Elgin. And this library is one of the things that's been around that long. And talking to some different people here tonight, I remember the old library. Do you remember the old library? And the one before that? And the one before that? Nobody's going back that far. So I'd like to take you back in time and look at some of the things that preceded where we're at here, which has been about 20 years. But there's been a lot happen in Elgin. There's been a lot happen in the world, and a lot's changed. But this library idea is still here in Elgin. It's grown, it's met the needs of the people, and evolved, and far more than books is what we have become. And you can just see that by walking in here and seeing that. I was on the library board, and people would tell us at the time, you don't need to build a new library, everything's going on the internet. It's really? Oh, okay, I don't know about that. So I'm really glad we did what we did, and proud of my efforts here being on the board. So here's a look back, as some of this was just noted here a few minutes ago. We're 150 years old. April 2nd, 1872, the electors of this area, Elgin Township, voted to establish a public library in the area. They couldn't do it ahead of that because it wasn't allowed. We didn't have legislation that would allow it. So this marked the beginning of the current Gail Borden Public Library. It wasn't called that at the time. The name Gail Borden, as some of you know, came about a little bit later. But we actually go back a couple more years than our 150th, because that's when we voted, let's do it. Let's establish a library here. So, but let's look at what was happening in the United States briefly, and around the area at the time too. 1870s, from the nearest census I can get, the United States had about 38 million people in it. Today we have about 331 million. Actually, you can go to the Census Bureau and it clicks up regularly. It's beyond that. This is the census from 2020. Elgin had about 5,400 people at it just a little ahead of the time this library was established. We were a small agricultural village, but there was a lot of things happening, which I'll note in just a moment, that were going on to change that. So the library was one of the things that came on board during a time in which Elgin was evolving into something very different. Today, depending on exactly where you go for the census, we're at about 114,000. So obviously way, way bigger today than we were when the library got goffed. What was happening here in the 1870s when this library was established? We could tick through a whole litany of things. Grant was president. The Brooklyn Bridge had been built, and Bell had invented the telephone. So it was a very different time. The streets were all muddy here. There was nothing like we know here today. But Elgin, as I said, grew rapidly in the 1870s. There's three things that were happening in our community that weren't going on elsewhere that would make a library even more of a factor. So we had a watch factory, and it was just getting going for the past decade or so. It was going to go very, very rapidly. The factory was attracting a lot of women in Elgin. Women like to read more than men, good, bad, or otherwise, I guess, but that's a factor. We were a dairy capital and evolving very much into a dairy capital in the area. You've seen the stories of that, and then also our mental health center, the Elgin Mental Health Center, the Elgin State Hospital. It's evolved and had different names during its time. By the way, and I'll show a couple pictures in a minute here, one of the things I would point out to you, that people that I talk to about Elgin history over time, they go, Jerry, why did we want the mental health center when we could have had Northern Illinois University? Those events were 25 years apart, and this state hospital meant a lot of jobs to Elgin, and it has its own history. At one time, it had over 7,000 people working there. Checking with our historical society and some of the things and videos that we've done, each one of these three things is in our video that we've done and explains. These are major things in Elgin's history that have all stories in themselves, and some of you have been at events that some of us, and not I'm the only one that does these kind of talks about the history of Elgin, can tell these stories about how important these were. There's our watch factory when it got going, by the way, just from a drawing. And somebody out there might say, oh, Jerry, no, it didn't look like that. I remember it. Well, the factory that went down in 1966 is not this one. This is the one that began, was founded during the Civil War, at about 23,000 square feet. And there's a picture as it starts to expand. It's on the site where the Buterres Shopping Center is today, down near the general area of the riverboat. So that's what it looked like at the beginning. And the whole story of the factory and how it would evolve is a tremendous story of Elgin as well. And the Northern Illinois Hospital for the Insane, its official name at the time, got its start in the early 1870s as well. Now we call it Elgin Mental Health Center. And these are some pictures that came later as that factory or that institution would grow. And it had a lot of people at it. It had the plans for what it would grow and become were very well planned. They were at the height of how things should be treated, people should be treated with those issues at the time. But overcrowding and other things would change it over the years. And then the dairy industry, which Gail Borden was part of. By the way, he'd never lived when this library was going on, as I think you may know. But we started shipping milk to Chicago to meet the needs of the growing cities that didn't have a refrigeration, and various things, factors came together and people in Elgin to make this a dairy capital here. And that's a whole story in itself. And I hope sometime you can check into our museum, look at some of the videos that I've done that tell those stories. So milk coming in from around this area. I think there's 3 dairy farms left in Kane County today. There are over 400 even at the start of at the 1950s. So, and then Gail Borden, who this library is named after, invented or popularized the idea of condensed milk. People were living in cities. They were traveling across countries that didn't have a refrigeration. Union soldiers needed fresh milk. And he says, let's do this. Let's put these in cans, add sugars and preserve it, can it, and it can last indefinitely. And it made him a lot of money. And he had other inventions and has a very interesting life, by the way. You can read about him. We have a book at the library called Gail Borden, Dairyman to a Nation. Check it out. It's a little old, but it tells an interesting story about Gail Borden. I'll come back to him in just a minute, but please know, some of the people unfamiliar with the area don't know that Gail Borden was a man. So sometimes people think otherwise. Obviously, you can't deny the picture here. But people that might not have heard the name before, sometimes, was that a woman? No, it was a man. And he always has the sternest looks on all his faces, too. Anyway, but another factor, major thing that would affect libraries in Illinois, and here in Elgin certainly too, was the Great Chicago Fire. Really, Jerry? Yes. Because one of the things that happened after the fire is England sent some books over here to help Chicago rebuild its library. It didn't have a library yet. And as you know, Chicago was a growing city. A lot of things were happening, and they were focused on a lot of things, but they really didn't have a public library at that time. So Chicago Public Library has this on their website. It came with some of the books presented to the city of Chicago from Her Majesty Queen Victoria, and they were with all the various books that were sent over here, and they were designed to help Chicago rebuild its library that it didn't have. But it did quickly get going on things. Legislation got the politicians in Chicago got talking fast, so did people in Illinois. Hey, we need to get a library going here in Chicago, and we need to get things going in Illinois. There are various other private libraries and things like that met people's needs, but there was no provision for establishment of public libraries up until that time. But things moved pretty quickly. Our governor at that time signed a public act that stated that the act said that towns and townships can establish free public libraries and reading rooms for the use and benefit of the inhabitants of the city. So this act allowed for taxation. People that wanted to have a library could now get one going. And notice the date on that, March 7th. By the way, we'll come to it in a second. Gail Borden Library, the predecessor to it, got going within a month. So this was something everybody wanted. But we did have some, as I said, private libraries that were going on. One was the a group called the Elgin Library Association. The Young Men's Christian Association had books established, so people that were connected with that organization could get books. There weren't like no places to find books and get books other than stores and buy them. But the library idea that we know today was not available at that time. As I said a minute ago, when we saw this date, Elgin area voters got going on this idea pretty quickly. A month later, they voted to establish the library, and I had this in the previous slide, 473 to 317. If you look at some votes of things during Elgin's history, they don't always do that well sometimes. So, but this one, the people of Elgin Township, which included South Elgin, which was much, much smaller, voted, yes, let's get a library going here. And things moved forward. I won't take you through every step, but on opening day, 2 years later, as Sadia said, March 19th, we got it off the ground. And I'll show you where it was in just a minute. They published this in the paper that we're going to open up the library. And notice you're a little far back to see this in your back, but it said, ladies especially welcome, invited people to come to this event, to see our new public library. The new library had books from some of these other organizations. They would donate them. They would be bought by and become part of the library collection that was being established as a public library. So those other things didn't get thrown away. So who were we first? Were we first, by the way? People ask me this question different times. I'm going to answer it in a little different kind of way. We were first to organize and vote for it. But Chicago Public Library got off the ground on January 1st, 1873, the Rock Island Library in 1872, and the Rockford Public Library in 1872. So they were kind of like out there and running up, but and we were certainly first in the Fox Valley. But depends on where you want to call the starting point. If you want to call the starting point getting together as a community and organizing and voting to start a library and getting the ball rolling, then I think we're first. So where was this library? Well, it was in right downtown Elgin, where the Tower Building now stands, the corner of Douglas and Chicago Street. And if you look at this, some of the people of my Historical Society colleagues are in here have seen these pictures many times, and oh, you're going to use that one again? Well, we love this one anyway. But anyway, this is Douglas Avenue, and the Tower Building sits where what would later become the Cook Building now sits. So the library would be on the third floor of that building, renting a space. So, and at the time it started, it had about 2,000 books in it. So I put a picture of the Tower Building there as a reference to you now. I don't have everything perfectly lined up, but those are the same corners there that show you where it was. So we're going back quite a ways in Elgin here. So who was our first director? His name was Louis Yarwood. We still know where his house is. It's right across the street from our History Museum on Park Street. He was a landscape artist, gained reputation as an artist in general. So his salary, $35 a month, maybe not that bad for a librarian at the time, but anyway, he would get the idea going. He would move the idea forward of the libraries and what we're doing. I was just talking with Carol Metal, our library director, before we began the meeting. She says, what was there, about 9? I says, yes, and I have their pictures in here. So the people that served as our directors have had generally long tenure and made tremendous impact on this library and what it does and what it's become, and herself included, of course. So, well, that's all on that. So what were the rules of the library? Well, some of them similar today. Be quiet, orderly, and clean. One book at a time, and you could keep it out for 2 weeks. Library cards are issued only to landowners and taxpayers. Others, if you want to put down a $5 deposit, which is a pretty good chunk of change at that time, you could also qualify for a library card. Those rules would evolve and change over time too, and there were other rules beyond this. But, you know, and you read some of the reports of some of the earlier libraries. We have things here. The newspapers would routinely carry a library report at the end of the year. A lot of books weren't lost that much at different times. They had to be destroyed sometimes because of contagious diseases. that were prevalent in the community, so they chose not to keep the books, but they had rules the same as we did today. So what would happen, this is the same building, by the way, just a different image of it. Eventually have over 8,000 volumes in it. What were they reading in the early days? The reports, again, are in our system here: fiction, juvenile travel, adventure. There were 26 newspapers earlier on, and 34 magazines. Everybody didn't come to the library just to grab a book of fiction rather than read it. They wanted to learn. We had watch factories that were people were reading technical journals. Other people in the other businesses were reading other business journals that met their needs. So it wasn't just coming up here and getting a book related to talking and reading about this. They wanted to learn as they do today. So the library met a lot of needs. They didn't stay there real long, though. They had some building problems. That was an old building and maybe not the best built for the times. It had a leaky roof and it had a lack of space. The library was growing rapidly. So they moved to East Chicago Street. And the arrow on the right shows you where they moved, and I'll show you a close-up in just a moment. This is East Chicago Street coming across the bridge, looking at the east towards what we know as Fountain Square. And the library was over here on the right. And you'll notice the little sign that says Public Library. So there's different pictures here and there that we can only see parts of it. I don't know of any pictures of the inside of it or anything like that, but we know what took place there. And these are some of the early pictures of our library. So, and there's that close-up of it there too. So these buildings don't exist there anymore. But for some people wanting a reference point, old-time Elginites, that was Schickler's Hobby Shop, Clem's Tavern, Ace Hardware, were some of the businesses right there. So this picture's a little out of focus. The library was growing rapidly. It needed more room. It talked about where to go. It talked about going in the basement of City Hall, which was the building would later be condemned. It wasn't the favorite place to be. Where are we going to go with this library? We need more room. So they got an answer. When the stepsons of Gail Borden said, we got a building, we're going to buy it, and we're going to give it to Elgin Township. And as long as we got one stipulation, when we do, the building has to be named the Gail Borden Public Library. So early on, and these are different views that I have of the library, and some of you know the library because you were in it. And I have a picture of the building as it exists today, shortly here, because it was the library I went to when I was in high school, and a lot of other people remember. There weren't a lot of other stipulations on it, but they did choose that name. The two stepsons of Gail Borden, and sometimes you think of how stepchildren get along with a stepfather. The relationship could be acrimonious, and I don't know how they were on a personal level, but they felt enough about him that they wanted to honor him by giving this building to Elgin Township. Again, I want to remind you, we didn't have a library district as we know it today. Elgin Township, our 6-square-mile township that still exists today. That's who operated the library at the time. And anyway, I get home and I say, I should have told them this, and this too. So anyway, here's some other things going on here. I put some of these on the screen. They put about $14,000 into it to remodel this. It was an 1870s home. It belonged to David Schofield. He was a nursery man. Some of the different houses and trees that we have around the Elgin area on the east side, they came from his nursery. So he did well. And the house itself was a residence, as I said. It would become a library. But it was just on the edge of what was then our downtown area. So it was in kind of a residential area at the time. So, and here's another picture of opening day. As I said, this wasn't necessarily taken right on opening day, but this is about close to that time. And this is another view of the library. There's different ones that are out there, slightly different times. And those of you that are familiar with the Elgin area know that Ackerman's department store, which is just behind it, is located there as well. In fact, The heart of the downtown was closer to what we know as the Tower Building today. And when Ackerman's, this is a side story, wanted to locate where they did, some people told him, that's too far from downtown. Well, it sure isn't anymore. So, and the library and the Ackermans would eventually connect together here physically too. But you can see it's a very, very different look at the time. So what it looked like, these are various pictures at some of the different times, not right at the opening and not right at a later date, but this was a home. And it had a nice look to it, a real nice look to it. The tables and the different events inside the interior. I wish I had these in color. They'd certainly stand out, but I guess you can always colorize photos, can't you? And some of the different businessman areas and the others. And I know they also have some steps that went up and down in the back. In just a little bit, you'll see a children's area added there. And they put that in at one point in time because the kids had to come out and come in the front door and be hooting and hollering when they did that. So let's get a stairway in there for the kids in the back. So, and some other views of the Spring Street building. And those of us that went there then, myself included, remember it very fondly. Yeah, it was cramped. It was small. And even during the time that they were getting ready to move on to the next library, not this one, by the way, they had to limit the hours there on the weekends. You had to have a library card to get in there sometimes because it was so crowded. They had to give preference to the people of the district that had cards. Different things that were happening at the time. One of the issues that came up, books in German. Are we going to have books in German? They had a petition presented to them by the German-speaking people of Elgin. I'm half German and half Swedish. My grandparents most likely could have been among those that wanted books in German. Are we going to have books in German? That's what they wanted on their petition. By the way, this is a picture. We printed newspapers in Elgin. They were the Deutsche Zeitung, was a German paper, literally by name. And even when some of you know, my father managed a business and distributed all the newspapers around Elgin. We sold them on the stand downtown Elgin in the 60s. The Abendpost, the Sonntagpost. We still had people, German-speaking people in Elgin that wanted those. So this goes back. This is part of our simulated culture, but there's a lot of people that spoke German in Elgin, and they wanted books. So what are we going to do here? No, some people said, the language of this country is English, and if the native or some other clime who comes here doesn't see fit to learn it, he's a loser. Somebody else? Yes, no, books will reach a class of readers who cannot as yet read our English volumes, said a newspaper urging the board to buy books in German and other things, and they did. So in the years ahead, the library would add a lot to the collection for the German-speaking residents of Elgin area, and in fact, later times we would add titles for Spanish speakers, and those that came from their Asian countries could read books in their language as well. The library is there to reach people for whatever they need. With the entry into World War I and the feelings against Germany, most German books were off the shelves, and a couple German-speaking churches in Elgin, they went to all English at that time. So that was a whole different time. So growth. That's the story of the Gail Borden Library during its history, even early on. By the 1890s, they had over 20,000 books, and they were just instituted the Dewey Decimal System, which was just brought on a few years earlier. And how are we going to find these books? It's a way to organize them by their subjects, as I know, which is the way they're organized out there today. By the way, noted a little bit here, who was Gail Borden? Some of you may know, but I put a few bits and pieces in here. And there's a great book on him and a lot written about him. He's a surveyor, a newspaper publisher, but particularly the invention of the Borden milk, the Eagle brand condensed milk that would revolutionize a lot of things in the United States. That was his thing. He died in Texas in 1874, where he lived. He had planned to come to Elgin, but he died before that time. His wife, and this is a picture of that book, was from Elgin. And she'd been married before. I think they're in Niagara Falls here. I'm trying to remember, but that's her, pictured with Gail Borden. And Elgin's growing reputation as a dairy capital caused her to say, Gail, you need to locate one of these factories here in Elgin. I had these in the east, but this is a perfect spot outside the growing city of Chicago, the transportation, all kinds of great offerings. And what would really help Elgin become a dairy capital, the real cog in the wheel, was this dairy plant by Gail Borden. We had a lot of dairy being shipped to Chicago, but he bought up the surplus milk. And the story, and it's in our programs at the Historical Society, he really raised the standards of milk at that time. We didn't have the federal government checking on anything, and you could end up with products that for children and others might not be anything that's doing any good for your health at all. So he changed the standards, and he changed and got very wealthy out of it well. So where was this condensing plant? And just a couple blocks from us here. This is the back side of it, by the way. I'll show you the front side of it in just a moment. In fact, this street doesn't exist over here. It got cut out of that way when we redid things down here. But you might recognize this view. You're kind of standing roughly out next to the Edward Schock Rec Center down here. And that is where the Borden plant was. It was a tannery that he converted into his area for production. The Elgin Milk Condensing Company was the name of his first company. It was only that for a few years. And most people around Elgin would know this as the Borden building, because that's what it was. And the Borden factory would have a lot of other buildings and places and involvement in Elgin besides just this. But that reminds us, this is one of 4 state historical markers that we have here in Elgin. This is kitty corner from where the Hemmons is, I think some of you may know. And that's a close-up of what's on that plaque. And I won't take the time to read it for you word for word, but it talks about what I just said. This is where the Borden factory was located and how it would change this area. So where did Gail Borden live? Well, he said he never had a house in Elgin, but his wife purchased this house on Division Street, just down the street from Holy Trinity Church and a few other places there. But he died just before that time. But this is the house. So you can take a drive down Division Street and see that house. Well, that doesn't look like, I guess it could be, couldn't it? So it was actually in the 1920s, the Christian Scientist Church bought that and remodeled it into a church-type building. So that's why it doesn't have that Italianate style look to it that the Borden house does. So it's an old house in Elgin with a lot of history. And as I said, Gail Borden visited Elgin frequently, by the way, but he didn't officially take up residence here. And we remember these people, Emmeline Borden, Emmeline Church Borden. We portrayed her at our cemetery walks. If you would like to see some of the different people that were prominent in Elgin, come out to our cemetery walk. We portrayed her once, and she talked about her involvement here. But Gail Borden is not buried here in Bluff City Cemetery in Elgin. Quite the contrary. He's got quite a big memorial in New York. And on that memorial, it reads, among other things, I tried and failed. I tried again and again and succeeded. I give walks, and I'm retired now as a teacher, but I would take my students through the historical society area, and I'd point that out, and I'd tell them, hey, do you know what he had on his stone? And I'd read him that, okay, Mr. T, we don't need any more of that stuff. Okay, I try harder. He did. Anyway, library changes over the times ahead, and we got 150 years. We're obviously going to condense this down pretty good. So, and this picture is faded. It's the best one I got right now. But this is the children's department, which was in the lower level of the building. If you're not familiar with the building, I'll show you some pictures of it in a minute. It opened just over 100 years ago. This is at the same time that kindergarten was just coming online in Elgin. So this is the first place I ever checked out a book, by the way. My father managed the Elgin News Agency. I had access to newspapers and books that I could never get enough. But I wanted to go to the library too. And my mother took me there, and I remember checking out the books. She says, take this pile up here, tell them this one you're returning, these you're checking out. Oh, okay, Mom. So, but somehow it worked out okay, and I've never stopped coming to the library since. So, and here's just a little better picture of that. And here's another one that's a little fuzzy, but notice as the time went on in the 1930s, a second floor was added to this as well, and the other wing. So this home of a nurseryman built for this would have a lot of expansions. And the stories of where things got moved around in the library, the different places, this was changed to here, this would move there. So you're seeing the exterior things here, but there's a lot of things of what happened on the inside too. By the way, one of my resources, and I'll credit him at the end, was a little small booklet, I guess I'll call it, by Mike Elft, who wrote about our libraries. And he's our true historian. I'm glad some of the rest of us can come up and tell stories, but he left us some of this information I'm sharing with you today. So, what happened here in the 30s? We added fluorescent lights. They haven't always been with us. Open stacks are installed, and as I said, the second floor is extended. Open stacks, from what I read, came on a little late in Elgin. Previous to that time, and you might remember some college libraries, you had a little piece of paper, took it up there, and they'd pull the book for you. But our librarian at that time, and you'll see our pictures of them, she'd been around like 40 years, and she didn't change it right away. So, anyway, things, but the libraries, don't let me mislead you, they've done so much, and they moved our library, had so much, every one of them. Second stories and railings at it, looks more like what some of us remember when we were students at Elgin going to our library. And here's that's a little blurry too, but that's all I got right now. This is the desk card and card catalog after the open shelf system was established. And I don't know if there's anybody in this room tonight who doesn't remember a card catalog. You probably all do. But there could be some of our younger people here that use the library don't remember it. And they still exist in schools and other libraries in various places too. So some of the different changes over time. The 1950s, Elsie the cow and her son Beauregard came here. They were right on the steps of the library, and they added LP records. They've since been replaced by other technologies, by the way, but those are some of the things that were happening at that time. Again, besides the library named after Gail Borden, the Borden industry had other things going on here, including research labs and other productions. So Borden had a foothold in Elgin that went beyond this library. In fact, the Borden business, it said, they really didn't have anything to do with the library other than its namesake. So, but growth leads to this next slide that I have here. During the 1960s, the area was growing very, very rapidly. And it was growing not just in Elgin Township. In fact, Elgin Township, a 6-by-6 square mile area that bumps up into Cook County by Lord's Park, it had passed into Hanover Township and Cook County in the 1890s. So the city of Elgin was one of the very first to lap over two townships, if we will, in two counties. And the library district was doing that too. But library townships don't have any ability to annex another township and take part of it off and add it on and redo things. So what are we going to do here? There was kids, and I was one of them, that lived just outside Lord's Park. My parents paid a fee for me to come in here and use the library. And it wasn't a lot, but it was a fee because we didn't live in Elgin Township. It was run by Elgin Township for people of Elgin Township. So one of the solutions to that was to introduce a bookmobile. This is the one that we had that time, and if you wondering what the bookmobile looks today, you can see it parked outside the north end of the building when you leave, or probably seen it going around to a lot of different places. But now it just operates in the library district. At that time, it was run by Gail Borden Library, Dundee, and Roselle Libraries to try to service those people out there that weren't close to their libraries. But logistically and I don't know, whatever word I'm looking for, it couldn't work. 3 libraries managing this, and the funds that came in, which flowed through one of them, it just wasn't going to work any longer. And the idea of a bookmobile that would go to all these different places never really took off. But that's okay, because the idea was getting going for establishment of a bigger area. And we were going to eventually have the Gail Borden Public Library District in just not too much future. So anyway, this is some of the things that were going on. 50 North Spring was their library at the time, and it was way too small in the 60s. As I said, people only with library cards could get in there, and it definitely lacked adequate parking. The growing downtown, Elgin was this hub of shopping in our area. And they had signs in downtown Elgin that hung there at the time. Elgin, shopping center of Northern Illinois. There was no room to park here to get to this library, either drop somebody off. A lot of people walked there that lived nearby, but it wasn't meeting the needs anymore. When I looked for pictures for this library, I asked one of the people at the library who was looking through some of our archives, hey, if you find a color picture of that building, let me know. I just think it was a cool building. And so meant so much to me personally. And I looked through a bunch of high school yearbooks looking for pictures of that as a color building. I think with the growth on the outside of the green, it had just a nice feel to it. But anyway, if you ever know one, I like to see it too. But that's what it looked like at the time. And in 1968, though, we would set our sights and we would move out of the Gail Borden Public Library, a district library, into a big civic center area that was being developed in Elgin. And the story of our development of our civic center, I'm just like zipping through here like it happened. There was so much to this story, and I'd be keeping you here for a long time. But we took down acres and acres of property with federal urban renewal money to build out a new post office, a new city hall, a new appellate court building, now library we're run by the library district, so the city of Elgin didn't pay for it, nor did the other government agencies for that matter. Post office is a federal government, appellate court building. It was a massive effort of governmental agencies that work cooperatively to work through this land and take down some buildings, some of which had probably been saved, and others we were probably happy to say goodbye to. And I know Mike Elf, if he was here, he'd be quick to credit Bob Brunton, our city manager at that time, who was sometimes known as Bob the Builder, because he made it go. He got it connected. To get together all these governmental agencies, it was a task. So the new library, we'll show you pictures of it in just a minute, and you'll see it was built for about $1.5 million, and about $1 million came from the bond referendum that people passed, and another $40,000 from a state grant. So, and that's 200 North Grove Avenue. Many of you remember it. This is actually the front entrance, but most people would go in the entrance on the north side because that's where the parking lot was. But it was a beautiful building, and just couldn't meet our needs anymore as we were growing. So here's some the old picture again. What did we do with that? The library board sold it to Ackerman's, which is right connected, and they connected to their building to ours for about $80,000. So we're talking 68, I believe. And there is 50 North Spring Street, taken a couple of weeks ago. I took a picture of that with my phone and put it in here. And lest you think that wasn't a library, by the way, and when I take people on tours, I say, look up above the door, please, and you'll see the name, Gail Borden Public Library, right up there, where it's been since the 1890s. So it's been part of the area for a long time. So here's a quick look inside the building that was across the street. and I know will bring back memories for many, including me, the times I spent there. My 2 sons were growing up there at the time, and we spent a lot of time in there. Notice how it looks. It was definitely wide open. This is the children's area. Maybe some of you were in these pictures. These came from the library and downstairs. And some of the others take you down memory lane here. And a couple others in the checkout area. And then I put these in here. So once that library was getting going, what was happening? Elgin was moving in the 1970s. It became a district library. And as I was saying, that's a whole story in itself of how we couldn't meet the needs by just Elgin Township anymore. And we still have expanded our library district to acquire parcels that are out there that add to our size. First automated circulation system, children's center opens, reciprocal borrowing with other libraries. So the library services are increasing greatly in terms of what you can get and what you can do. And we were like, I don't know if I put it in this show, we were like one of the first or second in Illinois to have computers that would do some of the things that we have do here, one of the first in the nation. So Gail Borden led the way in terms of some of the automation here. 1980s, new computers, HVAC systems, added in automatic public catalog, circulation topping $500,000, electronic security, and videotapes added to the collection. They were donated by the Friends of Gail Borden Public Library. And I know we've got some people in the library, in the program tonight that were there at the time when some of things happened. And Jerry, you should add this and tell them that, and don't forget. Yeah, but we don't want to be here too long. So I had to really pick and choose. The hardest part of doing this program is what am I not going to put in here? Because I didn't want to be here all night. But I tried to give you a flavor for how things have changed. So, and self-checkout machines, and there's a card catalog that some of you will remember going up to those things. And the 2000 era time, well, that's a lot, but the RACO branch opened up. New automation, DVDs, ebooks, circulation over 2 million. Our exhibits with giants, with a space exhibit. The new building opening over here in North Grove, and I'll tell you a little bit about this building in just a minute. The collection adding all kinds of different technologies. It just grew and grew and grew, and the offerings that the library had would become more and more and varied to meet the needs of what the people of the library district want. So these are kind of getting the last few slides. Now, these are facts taken off the library website of where we're at right now, and some of the details that Carol just noted a minute ago relate to where we are. And these, hopefully, are pretty close to what's happening. About 60-some% of the people in the district have a library card. We're the second largest library in the state of Illinois for the population served. This is the 5th largest library population after the cities of Chicago, Aurora, Rockford, and Joliet. These are our buildings today. The Gail Borden Public Library here, main building. Opened in 2003. You can look at the plaques and read about it outside. And click on a virtual tour online when you get home or later and see what's in here if you haven't already been around here and viewed some of the things that we have. As Sadia said, we've opened 2 branches. When I was on the library board in 99-05, we didn't have branches yet. We'd raised the money for one, but we really didn't get them going. But the RACO branch on Bowes Road, across from the Del Webb area down there, opened in 2009, and it's got a lot of offerings and awards. And the South Elgin branch, not too long ago, opened up in 2016. I added these in here because I think they need to be in here as in getting near some of the ending slides. There were 9, as I call them, library directors over the time that the library district has operated. And Louis Yarwood, you saw him earlier on. He was followed by Cecil Harvey. I think she died in cancer relatively early on. Catherine Abbott. who had the longest tenure for sure, from 1902 to 1943. She was here from the invention of the automobile, the advent of the atomic age here. And actually, two of those are one of these here is a librarian. Some of the other ones are directors, but Mamie Morgan was here at the same time as Catherine Abbott. And a few of the other ones, Mildred Lathrop, a longtime employee here, was here when they launched the microfilm machines, which is one of my favorite hangouts here. Thelma Sellers, Ida Wilson, and Bernard Openear, who was only here 1 year. And the last three, of course, Carol sitting over there, Dan Zach, and Edna Holland, who was here for a quarter of a century. So those are the people that led the library through what it is. And I thought, when I put this together, this little program, do I just go through it by year, or do I try to take each director and talk about their influence here, which is another way I thought about doing it. But no, I wanted to just put that out there and let that be a separate idea for what I have here tonight. So the credits for how I put this program together, as I said, the History Museum staff who provided me with some pictures, as did the Gail Borden Library staff, various editions of the newspapers here on microfilm, and a book called Books and More by Mark Elf. And actually you can bring that up online. It's on the library site. And here is a hard copy if you'd like to read through some of the things that I put in this program tonight. But a couple last little slides. Awards. Boy, you can find a lot of them. A lot of them are on the website for what Gail Borden has won. But one that I thought was worth noting here. In 2009, the Gail Borden Library won the nation's highest library award, the National Medal. And the text that went with that said, the Gail Borden Public Library is the heart and hub of exciting activities in Elgin, Illinois. Its motto, learning is a journey started here, has been the inspiration behind many activities. And with all the fantastic programs and events at the Gail Borden Public Library, community members sometimes ask, what's next? And actually, I'm going to kind of conclude my program tonight by just saying, what's next? Who knows? This is a great place, and I'm happy to tell you the story.